Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to The Great Retention with Kamber Parker Bowden, sponsored by Generational Performance Solutions. I'm Kamber, founder and CEO of GPS, where we bring you strategies to cultivate a dynamic, multi-generational, and committed workforce. Whether you're looking to enhance cross-generational communication or secure your company's future with dedicated professionals, we've got you covered. Today, I am really excited to welcome Sophie Wade, founder of Flexcel Network, workforce innovation specialist, as well as speaker, author, podcast host, you name it, joining us from London. So she is our first international guest of the season. So very excited to have her here. Sophie has spent her career becoming a specialist on workforce innovation. We met through a summit that we both spoke at earlier this year. And as I listened to her presentation on empathy and how it tied in with generational understanding, I knew we had to get her on the show. Sophie invited me to join her podcast in April, so I am now returning the favor and putting her in the hot seat this time. Sophie, welcome to the show.
I'm delighted to be here, Kamber. Great to see you again. And you weren't doing me a favor before. I was excited to have you share what you needed, what you had to express to help from a millennial perspective. Really help people understand.
Yeah. Well, likewise. It feels good to have you here because you really are just you have a wealth of knowledge and information on these topics that we're going to uncover today. And I was mentioning to you before the show, you have this really robust newsletter that comes out each week, and I'm drawn to it each time. Even if I can't get to it that day, I save it and I read it on the weekends. And so later we'll find out how people can connect with you. But you have so much to offer, and I'm just really excited that you chose to join us today, all the way from London. So let's start with a lightning round, in a couple of sentences or less. First, tell me something that is not on your resume. So something we wouldn't know if we took a peek at your resume.
Well, there's a lot on my resume. Moved all over the world. I think one of the things that is kind of like underlying what it means to have lived all over the world, which you'll see is everything that working in different places, living in different places, and working in sort of 5 different countries, what that means. So I think there's a lot of nuances about what I got up to. I guess there isn't that much sports on there, but yeah.
Great.
I have a lot of sports in the park.
Thank you. Well, I definitely want to unpack that more as we go on throughout our conversation. If you were not in this business, right, so working for yourself, speaking, consulting, writing, what would you be doing?
I always wanted to be a dancer. So that's a huge love of mine.
Yeah, very cool.
Don't know about being able to do it now, but it's very, very tough career. Yeah, that's a love.
Cool. And then what is your favorite modern workplace tool?
There are many. I think perplexity of all the AI tools that I use, because it actually takes you directly to the source. Lots of them are very useful. You still have to keep digging, correcting, checking. But perplexity actually takes me to the source. So that's a very useful foundational one.
Yeah, great. All right. Thank you. That was a very quick lightning round, and I love it because then we get to jump right into all of the conversations that we're going to have today, starting with talking about future-proofing your workforce, which is something you talk about often. So there are major changes happening in the workforce, not just weekly, but daily, by the hour, essentially. And it's causing a frenzy, right, in the workplace. Yeah. Some leaders are resistant to any change at all, while others are changing every system in their company, creating a lot of reorgs, restructures. So what do you see as the top changes coming for businesses across the world, and how can we best prepare for them? Now, obviously a loaded question, right? So how do you choose how to answer that? I think it would be really helpful for us to hear your global perspective personally, right, because that's something you already alluded to. So how do we future-proof the workforce?
Well, we're in the beginning, really, of a multi-year transformation that we're all needing to go through. This digital transformation that people started on, I guess, in the 2010s, was really when we first started hearing about digital transformation, which I call digital transformation 1.0. Now, AI has really accelerated the need for what you call it digital transformation 2.0. So there are a lot of interdependence, multifaceted shifts that we're going through. And this is huge for all of us. driven mostly by technology and accelerated by AI. Yes, the societal changes. Yes, there are sort of geopolitical dynamics as well. But in how we're working, it has been fundamentally been changing over the course of the last 10, 20 years, by the smartphones, by laptops, mobility, all those different things and all these applications that we can use and to be more productive and all that kind of thing. The key thing that I think is really important for leaders to be thinking about and helping their teams with is being open-minded and really trying to have a sense of where are we? What is? Not through my lens as much as possible. I'm Gen X, like what I've been, what I've done, how I've done it, and the rest of it. That can really affect how able I am to see what's actually going on rather than kind of like, well, it should be like this, or it should be like that, or I used to do it like this. Let me try and just like adapt that incrementally to what is, but really trying to take a step back and look at what is and be open-minded about the new possibilities that technology can afford us, that mobility of devices can enable us with. So I think that open-mindedness to really trying to understand where we are, and that helps understand where we can go, because using the same ideas, the same tools, the same premises, the same parameters in terms of how we're working or where we're working, all that kind of stuff is going to hinder any leader and any team from being able to understand how to move forward in the most effective way. And that just makes resistance, it makes challenges. You try and you fail and you have to, and you just keep iterating. It is going to be iterative. It is all going to be iterative because everything is changing at the same time as we move forward. So that I think is the most fundamental way to have the right mindset to be able to kind of like look openly at where you are for your business, for your team, for your unit, for your division, and move forward on that basis.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. Once companies can do that and they kind of are aware and take a step back and have maybe this new open mindset, a lot can happen from that, right? You might see results like higher productivity, enhanced performance, and as a workforce innovation specialist, you often write and speak about how to maximize productivity and continue to grow in an increasingly digital world, which again, you've already kind of alluded to. But you also talk about this human-centric leadership. And so, you're talking about this constant state of change, that technology and AI are kind of the drivers here, but they're still humans in the workforce, right? Like we're not gone from the workforce. So thinking about that, what do you think is that perfect balance between automation and human authenticity? Like I'd love to unpack that a little bit.
So I'll answer that as well as sort of bringing in the sort of 5 shifts that I talked about in my newsletter, which was, so in all of this sort of huge transformation, I broke it down into 5 shifts. One is shifting the mindset. That's the first one, which I just talked about. The second one is having some dynamism, understanding how our businesses work rather than rigid structures, but sort of framing it differently so we can feel it moving and it feels more natural. And we're used to all kinds of things which are natural. Sort of sports teams are have very sort of flexible internal structures when they're playing. So nature, we're used to the seasons and adapting to the weather every day, all that type of thing. The third one is digital maturity and digital dexterity, which is very much about human operations and how flexible your digital operations are and how fluent your people are in working digitally. The fourth one is the move from skills to jobs. Again, how people are needing to adapt from the unit of work going from a job to a composition of skills and lots of different projects where you're working together more on teams. And the fifth one is the blended workforce. Again, it's all about people and humans, employees and non-employees, humans and non-humans. So the blended workforce includes obviously some agentic AI, but very much about who is actually working. So many of those portions of the shift are deeply, human related. And so trying to understand the tech and talent balance, this counterbalance of talent and technology. Who is the one who's actually using the AI? Of course, it's people. And people are very much involved and reacting to and challenged by this amount of change at the same time. So we really need to be thinking about who the people are on our team, how well they are adapting, how they're, how much they're able to transition and how technically, adept they are, how fluent they are, how can I help each person separately do better or advance better, what's going to help them learn more quickly. And, that struggle, that anxiety about whether it's, fear of loss of job or where is AI going to slot into the things I do? What are my skills? I need to understand myself better to understand my skills so I can bring AI in productively. So much of what we're doing and dealing with and need to be much more attuned to is the human side of work and really understanding what each person's capable of, how they can use technology, how they can bring that in and work in this blended workforce of humans and non-humans.
Yeah, I now remember here, seeing those 5 areas. And so thanks for expanding that here in a concise way so people can really digest it. At the end of the day, for at least the foreseeable future, right, we are now engaging with people and non-humans in the workplace. And you have to assess the risk as we continue. But at the end of the day, like what I've found, at least in speaking, and I think you probably would agree with this, people, yes, there's virtual opportunities to speak, but given the chance, companies want you in person. Like they're craving that in-person connection. And so I think that piece is really important to pay attention to. Like companies are kind of, I think, with the return to office pushes that we're seeing, at least here in the US, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, people are craving this in-person connection, yet we now have this new player in the game, AI, and all the variations of AI. And that is such a contrast in a lot of ways. So any words to that, or should we jump on to our next conversation?
I don't think there's been more realization now about the combination of in-person and not in-person. I think sort of from the pandemic, there has been a craving, particularly by the youngest group, a lot of Gen Zs who did feel very isolated, who hadn't had those in-office experiences. It doesn't mean that anybody wants to be in the office any more than is actually going to help them be productive or help them work together with their teams. We don't need to be collaborating in the office. We don't need to be in person all in one place to be effective at all. And, no consulting company ever said, yes, everybody should be 100% in the office 5 days a week. Nobody ever did that analysis and came out with that result. The point is now we're understanding when we haven't seen each other enough, we haven't been in person. Yes, you and I connected very well in person, and now so we can relate very, very easily when we're not together. I have lots of relationships where I've never met the person in person, sort of in real life. We don't really like that term because this is real too.
Yeah.
And I then also get much deeper connections with them, responding to their LinkedIn posts or making comments. Like I know people differently from having seen, or more deeply by having seen what you've written on LinkedIn and what your positions are and how you think about things. That helps me connect with you as a person. So I think understanding what makes sense in terms of how much we need to be together. And yes, very much there is a cadence that Atlassian has come up with. The fact that, their research shows that it's a 4-month cycle, that when you're in person, then at the end of 4 months, that sort of tail of the deeper connection you've made. In fact, Airbnb has a longer cycle, which actually has a sort of longer tail. One of the things I think is interesting that they have a model where they do a lot of synchronous meetings. And I think potentially that synchronous online virtual meetings, perhaps that gives them more connectivity that allows an in-person meeting, or maybe their in-person retreats are different. I don't know. So it really does depend on the company and what makes sense for them. And so I think we all need to be really spending a lot more time right now understanding work, designing it for our people, for our teams, for our company, for our business, however distributed it may be. And that's part of the challenge. Is there's no cookie cutter whatsoever. It really depends on the technology you're using, how spread out you are, the people, what their needs are, and what your business needs.
Yeah, thank you for responding to that. Let's pivot to talking about generations now, Sophie, because that's my sweet spot, and I think I just love your perspective when we talk about this. So let's state the obvious. Every day there's a new headline. Like I get all of the Google alerts when Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, baby boomers are mentioned. And there's a lot of them that come through, let me tell you. But there always seems to be this like sweeping generalization about generations and particularly like their weaknesses. It's never typically positive headlines. I would say it's much more negative. And I think that these headlines are resonating with more seasoned individuals, right? Those more seasoned professionals. Which I think signals a clear disconnect between generations. So what is your advice for leaders who can't seem to connect with their team members from different generations? And do you have any thoughts to some of those headlines?
Yes. So first of all, I would say typically there's whoever writes the article does not write the headline. They write a suggested headline and then some headline person, and it's clickbait, right? When somebody looks at a headline, when a senior leader looks at a headline, they really need to read the rest of the article properly. And that is not with that visceral, oh my God, which comes with looking at the title and kind of like, yes, I knew that validates how I feel about, Gen Zs or millennials, whatever it might be. But really thoughtfully looking, because the rest of the article, the entire article typically doesn't say anything close to the extreme in that heading. And that's really important because there are lots of ones which sort of say, work from home is over. And then you look through the article. This is particularly, there have been a couple recently for the UK and very similar ones in the US, where it sort of said, everybody's coming back to the office. And yet the article was talking about Barclays and Asda and a number of other large companies where they were more reinforcing, reinforcing the policies that they already had, which are 3 days a week. It wasn't 5 days a week. And they were trying to get more compliance. They were saying, we really want you to be coming in. We really think that that's important. So they were pretty flexible. Many of them, some of them were fixed days. Some of them were actually flexible days, but they were just saying like, we want you to come in for those days a week. So it wasn't the, everybody has to be back in the office all the time. That's, for the most part in England, they've understood. That's it. The government has said flexible working it's a better idea, period. And in fact, the UK has had a flexible working or the right to request flexibility since, across all companies with more than 50 people since 2014. And it actually sort of started off in 2004, when they were sort of experimenting and then expanding it. So there is understanding that flexibility in working is going to be better for so many different people and for the businesses and for, the attraction of talent and optimizing office space. It's just taking longer for some businesses to get there. So also the Flex report has some great data which shows in the US that, and globally, that I think it is 85% of companies with fewer than 500 people. Now, that is 99% of companies in the US. I think it's 97% of companies in the UK have fewer than 500 people. Yep. And in those, it's, as I say, like 85% of those companies have either flexible hybrid or either fixed days, flexible hybrid or fully remote, or sort of, fixed days hybrid. What that means is that it's really the very big companies, 20,000 people and above, or, maybe 5,000 people above, the percentage goes, the percentage is somewhere there as well. And those are the companies with many, many more employees who are taking more time to transition. There are a lot of clickbait articles written by the headings are very different from what's actually in the rest of the article. And I think the challenge with that is that there are a lot of senior leaders who don't read the rest of the article and look at the research and really think about what's going on. And my whole work on empathy is really about, it's not about being kind and nice. It's really about understanding the other person and trying to connect, not try and understand how I would be if I were Kamber, but understand Kamber from Kamber and look through your eyes at your perspective of what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's where I sort of started my whole generational thing, is because, millennials, in fact, it was millennials who were being maligned, like, oh my God, and they're doing this and they're doing that. And it's, how could they possibly react like this? Well, what I saw was there was lots of similarities with when Gen X had been in the workplace and they were called slackers and boomers before them. I'm sure the same thing. Well, there were a few differences. And that was really how technology was making a difference. And new devices, the smartphone, and when it sort of opened up, and there are many more apps in 2009, and what possibilities that opened up. And a lot of millennials were saying, well, we can work differently now, so why don't we? So that really helped me sort of understand, okay, let me put myself in other people's positions and try and understand that. And that's what I've been doing for a huge amount of my time, is really connecting across generations, whether it's to do with technology, or same generation in different places, different cultures. And that's what I think that leaders can really try and do. So if they can ask questions of their team members who don't have, and this doesn't have to be generational, it can be all kinds of different dimensions. But if you're trying to understand one of your younger team members, and you might have a kid who is around that age, ask those questions. Really try and understand from their perspective what they're experiencing. For example, I've seen several articles which blame Gen Zs for non-linear careers. They don't want to go in linear paths. There aren't linear paths in the same way that they used to be. Companies are flatter. Instead of having 10 to 15 layers of hierarchy, you now may have 3, 5, 6, 7. And so non-linear careers has to be the way that the younger employees are trying to move internally. It's very hard to move internally within organizations still, because this is new. So really trying to understand what the reality is for people who have different age experiences coming in, different careers, different career possibilities, upskilling. When I came into the workforce, I could, basically exist with the same skills, learn very, very slowly. That is not possible for young people coming into the workforce now. And we have a difficult situation, which I'm interested to hear what you think about this gap, experience gap. Mm-hmm. So in the UK, the data is that the average work experience expected of an entry-level job is 2.7 years. Mm-hmm. This is really tough, and it's nobody's fault. It is that all the easy stuff has been taken away, and increasingly even more stuff is being taken, of the tasks being taken away by automation, by AI. And so now there's a big gap between, what somebody comes out of school or comes out of college and what the complexity of the work that they're expected to do when they sort of enter the job or the workforce. Well, that is creating a very difficult situation for the youngest people coming out of college, all the hope, all the expectation of, what their life is going to be like. And there are a lot of barriers and a lot of people who are resistant to them, a lot of people saying they're lazy, they don't care. Well, the laziness for me, is part of, and I'm curious as to what you think, but one of the things that I found is that if you don't know what your career is going to be, you don't know what job you're going to have in a few years' time, because so many new jobs are popping up all over the place. It isn't as easy to really sort of attack the work that you're doing and sort of go full pelt towards some destination, because you don't know what that destination is. Right. So that may cause you to kind of go, well, if I'm not quite sure what's ahead, I'm just going to wait out some of this. I'm going to acquire some skills, some transferable skills, and then lean into having a better sort of work-life balance. I'm not being lazy. I'm being thoughtful, and I'm seeing, I'm going to take my time to try and see what's going on. I want to stay competitive. I want to keep upskilling, but I'm not being lazy. I'm just trying to reassess and save my energy really for what's ahead.
Yep. You unpack, there's a lot to unpack with all that you just said, because it's so, all of what you just said is so important, Sophie. I think a few thoughts that I have. The first is I'm glad you brought up empathy, right? Because that is that's what your book is about, your most recent book, which when did your book come out again?
May 2022.
Okay. I was going to say 2 or 3 years old at this point. And so it's not about, let's be nice to everyone. It's about how do you see things through their eyes? And that's what we talk about often. It's, we're not trying to get you to change your mind or excuse me, we're not trying to get you to change your beliefs, but what would it look like if there was that mindset shift? Like just helps move the needle in the workforce, because if you go in and you look at every generation that comes into the workplace through this really intense lens, then you're making assumptions. You're automatically going to see tension and challenges. And I hear from leaders so often who say, Gen Z, they just don't want to work. They don't have the work ethic. They're lazy. They don't have critical thinking skills. And what I often say to those people, I always ask a question back, and it's like, do you know how they're motivated? And most people do not answer that. They can't answer it. And we talked about that in your podcast, right? Like, if you don't know how people are motivated, then how do you know if they're lazy or not? Because to your point, they're conserving their energy. They're being thoughtful. It goes back to the quiet quitting term and that fad that was very popular several years back, kind of post-pandemic, which for anyone listening that isn't familiar with that, it's just doing what's on your job description. It's kind of doing what leaders like to say the bare minimum, but a lot of Gen Zers and millennials say, we're just doing what's on our job description. Why would I do more if I'm not getting a raise and I'm not getting paid more?
Right.
And, a lot of leaders look at that very negatively, but in reality, it's like they're just conserving their energy, and it's just everything is different. It's not their career paths are so different.
Yeah. And for me also, the loyalty thing kind of upsets me sometimes, because they're not loyal. I'm like, well, loyalty is actually a two-way street. And when I was sort of loyal to my company, I got pretty much job security. I could expect to retire and get a pension, all that kind of stuff. And that's not what Gen Zs and millennials can expect. And they know that. They're very aware of that. And so it's kind of like, well, what are you doing for them? They have no job security whatsoever. And you keep even talking about the fact that AI is going to replace jobs. So what's coming? What are they getting for that loyalty? Because it is a two-way street. It isn't duty. And even if I really were to ask, certain leaders, and I don't necessarily go that far, I just say, well, was loyalty a duty? Is that how it was seen? Because that was a sort of work culture thing. It wasn't necessarily owed.
Right. Yeah. I think that somebody on our podcast actually this season made a really cool comment last week, I think, and they said, loyalty is still there. Like, young people are still loyal.
Oh, yeah.
Blind loyalty is what has changed. And that really stood out to me. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but it just really, it goes back to what we've been saying. It's like, these things are not gone. It's just, you have to look at it through a different lens. And one other thought, or actually go ahead before I jump to another topic.
I was just going to say the blind loyalty. I think, that's an interesting word to use, because I think more loyalty comes from more connection when you have like a connection on values or purpose. Like, maybe that's the clarity that is the opposite of blind. It's like, now I know why I'm here, and you know why I'm here, and we're going to be doing this together. I'm here. And maybe that is the vision, which is not the blindness.
Yeah. One other thing to unpack from what you shared, which you mentioned the experience gap. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Something that I'm paying attention to, I've posted on LinkedIn. I think you're very aware of this as well. You hear a lot now about entry level. You pointed out the stat about like 2.7 years is like the average need for these entry level roles. We're seeing AI eliminate some entry level roles, and we're also seeing middle managers also flattening, and that's been happening for a while. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, probably even sooner, what does that mean for these younger workers coming into the workforce who have to jump over these obstacles and these hurdles? I think it really comes down to organizations having to like look even further down the, looking at primary education, like really starting super, super early, because we're essentially saying that formula that I just shared, we're essentially saying come on into the workforce and jump up to C-suite, a VP role? Because what else is there going to be for these Gen Alpha one day to come into? So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Okay, so thank you for asking that question because it's very interesting. I had a very interesting conversation with a guy who for 8 years was a CHRO at Indeed. And we were talking about what do you call it? Individual contributor roles, which you've had much more of in the tech sort of department, right? You've had some people kind of like, well, they're not going to be a good manager, but they're still amazing and they're going to get better at it. So this person can be a manager, but this person won't. That is something that we can do more of. If you think, first of all, you can think about that in non-tech area where somebody can be excellent, but they don't have to be a manager because most people according to Gallup, only 10% of people are actually good managers. And somebody said to me, apparently there's only maybe 10% more that can be good managers. And now management is much more complex. Even before we had not even AI, it's actually the flattening of organizations that has been sort of, causing the sort of managers having more, more direct reports. The other element to that which is enabled by AI, is the more clarity you have, and I'll have to just put a pin in the point of holacracy. So holacracy is a management organizational system. And what it basically does is takes out, basically everyone's flat in an organization. But the point about that is when you have incredible clarity about what every person is supposed to be doing, you need fewer managers. Because the point about managers is basically to help tell people what to do and make sure that they're doing it. But if we really designed my work and you're my manager and I'm really, really clear about what I need to do and we set up the project and everybody in the project knows exactly what we're supposed to be doing, your need to oversee this project is really diminished. So as we use AI and we use technology in a much more thoughtful, more designed, proactive, intentional way, we don't need as many managers. So if you have more of these individual contributor progression, you have a sort of flatter organizations, but it doesn't mean that people aren't doing, much, much more advanced work without having to go up that that career progression. But also people are moving sideways. You can move horizontally, you can move diagonally and be working on different projects to increase your skills, to have different experiences, to learn more about organizations. So that's already been happening and it's happening more and more. It's sort of hard to do. It's internal marketplaces, understanding about skills and all that kind of stuff. But that is making work different. It is a different experience. You're really having a much more, I think, enriching understanding of a company and a business and how that works. So, but that is a real evolution in terms of how that's happening. I do think there needs to be, going into education much younger, understanding, the critical thinking, problem solving, teamwork. And I see that my son is 25, but he already, when he was in middle school, they were doing more teamwork. My daughter, just left high school. They were doing a lot of teamwork where they were graded as teams. Yes. That helps people understand how to be working together and that the grade result is based on how well you work together. So I think there's a lot of things. Also, companies need to sort of come down and help interact. Sometimes there are a lot more programs where they're sort of working with universities and colleges and schools to help bridge that gap. And a lot more of that needs to happen. And that needs to happen fast. Yeah. Because this gap is really very challenging.
It is. And thanks for giving additional context. I think it's really important for people to understand, again, we talk about change a lot because that is what, if you understand generations and you're aware of the generations, that is in theory change management, right? If you can understand how to predict and prepare for these changes that are coming, you're naturally going to be a little bit more curious. And I think curiosity is a big part of this empathy, this sense of empathy that we've talked about today. We're taking a quick break for today's episode to share something really special. If you have not yet heard, my book, The Generational Advantage, hit shelves this September, and it really focuses on generational intelligence. Yes, generational intelligence. And so if you like this podcast, if you like learning about generations in the workplace, it might be time to take your own generational knowledge and intelligence to the next level. We have a book for that. The book, The Generational Advantage, really does unlock the secrets to multi-generational leadership. From Gen X to Gen Z, workplace expectations are shifting really fast. And my book is here to help you with the tools, insights, and strategies to not just navigate this complexity, but to thrive in it. Order it now everywhere books are sold and start building your team's performance across generations. Visit thegenerationaladvantage.com to learn more. Let's pivot a little bit. I would love to know your thoughts on what you think the future of productive work is, right? So not just the future of work, but the future of productive work, because, a lot of leaders are struggling with team productivity right now. I think what you just mentioned about having more clarity and paths for individual contributors without the management title, I love that. I think that's brilliant. And obviously there's a system in place for that already, but what else would you tell leaders who are looking to drive performance across their workforces? What are some tips that you would tell them?
So I love that you ended with asking about performance, because I do think about performance very differently to productivity. I did a huge project for a company about 10 years ago now about productivity. We were trying to come up with a productivity index. I did so much work on it to find out that most companies have no idea how to measure productivity. Sales is one of the easiest ones because you measure results. If that lead ends up in a result, okay. But my work all before doing all of this workforce innovation was strategy. How can you measure strategy? How many presentations I do? How can you measure how productive I was? And what about the direct impact of the strategies I came up with? Very, very hard. So how people measure productivity and how they measure it's not widgets that are output. We have knowledge work. There's a huge amount of sort of research into the sort of 6 different factors. There were couple of companies, the only 2 companies that came up with any kind of reasonable attempted method to understand knowledge worker productivity. However, that complication aside, because the measurements should be different for your sales team, for your technology team, for your strategy team, but measuring results, measuring outcomes is what is the way to go, is really trying to understand what are the outcomes for that team. And is it individual or is it a team-based? Team-based outcomes are going to be the thing to track. And keep iterating to try and work out the best way to measure whether that team is performing well. And so really trying to dig into what is the work that they're doing? What are the tasks that they're doing? And when collaborative work has increased 50% over the last 20 years, it says HBR, and also teamwork, non-routine work, because of all this routine work being automated away, that's also increased enormously over the last 20 years. So what we need to be doing is when we're working on non-routine work, we're working much more in teams. We need to be thinking about how we're measuring work, how we're measuring outcomes in a very different way. So that really does go, again, to that stepping back and trying to design work differently to understand work. And then you need to understand the people. And that's where some very interesting work by Paul J. Zak. That's ZAK. Now, he's done a lot of work on trust because he was looking at engagement. The more engaged workers are, the better they perform, the better the results are. And engagement, the fundamental core piece of it is about trust, which is very clearly related to empathy. Yes. So that's where leadership and having the trust, and that's where a lot it comes into the generational piece enormously, because of what disconnects, as you talked about, the disconnects between generations, the lack of trust, whether, if you're tracking people's keyboard strokes and you don't believe them and you call them lazy, you're not stimulating some good trust and helping the engagement. So I think when it comes to thinking about the metrics on the one side, but also the relationships, the trust, and when you have more trust and you have safe space so that people can open up, they can share not only their wins, not only they're sort of sharing what they did, they're sharing more ideas, they're coming up with the crazy ideas, and somebody goes, oh my God, that's a great idea, but let me think about that. You also it also means that they're sharing their mistakes. They're sharing kind of like, well, I don't know, because so many of the younger generations, they are worried about their jobs. They don't want to ask questions. There's all this data now showing that how many Gen Zs would much rather ask AI than their manager about career progression possibilities and, pretty much many, many questions besides. So if you're going to stimulate that trust, to have better interactions, to have better human interactions, the managers have much better sense of what's going on. These are the two things that we really need to be thinking about, and they're big.
They are. And I love hearing, obviously it sounds so simple when we talk about it like this, right? It really does. But if you're a company with more than 500 people, or you're even a company with 100 people, it's going to be challenging to kind of shift to this way of thinking. Like it's easier said than done. So I want to give that caveat as well.
Oh yeah.
One other kind of major question I have for you today before we slowly wrap things up, because I feel like this time has flown by, but I really do want to talk about kind of some of the global differences that you're seeing just across generations and how organizations view generations in the workplace, but also just work in general. You've already mentioned a few things today about what it's like in Europe versus the States, but I would really love to just kind of hear your thoughts, because you have had such a rich global life, right? Where you've traveled all over, you've worked all over. So what are some of the similarities and what are some of the differences in the workplace and how we view generations today?
I think it's been interesting to me to see how incredibly similar the experiences are across sort of the generational differences are very similar around the world. The work cultures are pretty different. In the US, the work culture is pretty on the extreme in terms of it being assumed. Like if I canceled dinner with someone because I had to work late, it was just kind of like, oh, that's a shame. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do that in Europe, that's not okay.
Yeah,
it's really pretty rude. And I had to be reminded of that a year ago or so.
Uh-huh.
So the work cultures, but it's the impact of technology that is very similar in terms of how it is changing, how people interacting, what possibilities there are for young people to do their own thing. The, creator economy, which is, and influencers who, the point is they're creating their own livelihood. They're finding other ways to use technology, to create something for themselves. Sometimes, in fact, I think a lot of times because they don't really appreciate the corporate environment. Mm-hmm. And I can understand that. Mm-hmm. So, the point is like, how is technology affecting different people across the world, across the generations? It does seem to be very similar. The work cultures are very different. I worked in Germany for 2.5 years, and that really is, you typically get to work at 9:00, and a lot of people would be, off work and leaving the office at that time, at 5 p.m. I happened to be working in a technology company, and so it was rare that technologists would be working late, they'd be working over the weekend, and that was where some of the changes were happening because technology was coming in and allowing people to be working from home and working in different ways. So I think, you have. Some people sort of say, well, in Asia, you have many more young people who are coming to the office and they want to be in the office. Well, young people around the world want to be in the office because of the isolation that they suffered during COVID. Yes. Do they want to be in the office? Do they want to be forced in the office and mandated specific hours? No. But they do appreciate the camaraderie. And if you actually gave them co-working spaces, which were closer to home so they wouldn't have to spend as much money, and they could, maybe go home, and so save money on food, they would do that. So really trying to understand, this is where I go to the sort of the empathy and the leaders asking questions and sort of saying like, well, what is it that makes you tick? What is it that you want to be doing? What work do you love doing? Because if I direct people in my team to be doing more of what they love doing, they're going to do more. They're going to do better at it. And they'll be also more willing to do the stuff that they really don't want to do, which we know that everybody needs to do some of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well said. I really love, you mentioned the work culture is different. I think that's really important because I've also seen, generations and how organizations view generations across the world. I do feel like there's similarities across the board, but the work culture piece, I do see the drastic changes and differences, but there's also a lot of similarities in the process. So I'm glad that you referenced those as well. Any final words today? I would love to know how people can find you if they're looking for your expertise. So please share that with us. But also any last words that you want to share with our audience that you think is really important for them to know about the future of work and empathy and all the things we talked about today.
That's easy. No.
Yeah. So, I was like, there's a lot.
So I think one of the things that I do think empathy or understanding the other person that you're dealing with, whether you're talking to them live, you're in person with them, you're writing to them, really trying to understand what they've said. Did you really understand what they've said? That empathy, that kind of like, do I understand it from their perspective? That is fundamental to pretty much anything we're dealing with. And because so much is changing, it is so important. There's so much that is easy to misunderstand, to really not, to misinterpret or misunderstand. So having those clarifying questions makes all the difference. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I would say is that there are no cookie cutter solutions. It is different for every team, for every company. And I did come up with principles. So this modern work has life principles. LIFE, learning, intention, flexibility, and empathy. So what it means is if you sort of think about those things in all that you're doing, it's all about learning new things, being open, like trying to understand, being proactive, being intentional, moving forward. Life is not passive right now. Work is not passive. You really need to be leaning into it as we're going through much change. Flexibility, being able to pivot, being able to change, being able to think differently, and empathy is that understanding. So those are the key things. And do have on modernworklife.co is where I have a new course, coaching, and I also have my newsletter, which you referenced, thanks so much, which is called the Work in Progress Report, because that's where we are. Yeah. The Work in Progress Report, which is available at Flexos, FLEXOS.com.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to put all of that.
Flexos.work, sorry.
No, it's okay. We got it. We got you. And we'll put it in the notes so people can find you a little bit easier too. But, obviously for those listening and watching today, you can tell why I wanted Sophie to be on the show. Like you really are just a great person who, some of our work overlaps, but so much of what you do, you have decades of experience here, and really, I admire you. I admire your work, and I'm honored that you chose to join me today on the show.
Oh, Pocket. Kamber, so thank you so much for having me. I love our conversations, and I'm always learning from you as well, and really appreciate being on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for those listening and watching for joining us again on The Great Retention. Before you go, remember this: the generational landscape is shifting, and today's workforce is not the same workforce we once knew. Our mission is to help you save time and money by identifying these shifts and demystifying generational differences while lifting up generational strengths. And we do that through our workshops, our programs, our keynotes, and our workforce planning. Contact us today at GPS if you're interested in transforming your multi-generational team. And last but not least, make sure to pick up your copy of my book, The Generational Advantage: How to Lead, Communicate, and Drive Performance Across Generations, available now where all books are sold. Until next time, thanks everyone. Have a great day.